Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Insight Live. I'm Jason Rader, and I'll be your host as we talk about the path to digital transformation, where IT leaders stand today with the results of our annual Foundry survey. And we've got two of our favorite experts with us today. We've got Carm Tagliente, our Chief Data Officer and Distinguished Engineer, and Tom Hearn, our VP of Architecture. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you. Love being here.
So, where do we start?
Oh,
Well, first of all,
oh,
for those of you who are wanting to know what we're talking about, there is the complete results of our survey are on insight.com. Feel free to go there and check it out. You'll be able to find the links right at the very beginning of the website. Um, but we wanted to talk about kind of a couple of things, and do some comparisons between last time and this time and see what's going on. And I think one of the things that we're kicking off with, near and dear to your heart, Carm, is the fact that AI is still a big priority to a lot of people. Does that
mm,
sound surprising?
yeah. No, not surprising at all. Interestingly, though, when you said transformation, I sighed a little bit because I was thinking to myself, it's like, is it transformation or is it disruption? As we think about what's happening in the industry, and I think AI in general. So, the first thing that we did about a year ago was really think about the fact that, AI is back. That's great, but it's not it's not your grandfather's AI anymore, or we like to call it classical AI. We're talking about generative AI now. And I think the transformational elements of this, and we see some of this in, one of the results of the survey was really one of the top priorities or identity areas of impact was around the gaps in the organization to be able to use these technical capabilities. And I think this is true to a large extent because of the fact that the technology keeps evolving and we keep kind of iterating on its capability, generally speaking. So AI now has become more approachable, more usable, more democratized, and but it still needs some level of training and usage, and so it needs to be supported by the executive groups, the executive teams, and a whole host of capabilities that need to be in place for it to have an impact within the organization. And I think that was one really interesting part of this when we looked through the survey. And I think we're getting that reflection from a lot of our customers and probably from the market as well. So it's kind of a good way to open up this conversation is to think about it's not just the technology and it's not just AI, because we can say AI all day, but until you actually use it and put it to good purpose, it's really what you make of it to some extent. So yes, it's still going to be here for many years to come is the real answer to the question.
And I'll just add to that. I think it's interesting that, when we were talking through this before we jumped on today, the number one from a constraint perspective was gaps in technology, skills, and knowledge. The second one was budget constraints to fund innovation. And the third was infrastructure not being optimized. And those are largely in line with the results we saw at the last survey, plus or minus, 2 to 3% on each of them. But to me, the increase in trends that we saw in desire for as a service consumption models, flexible pricing models, the statistics and results that we found in hybrid multi-cloud and the ability for organizations to scale and move workloads between traditional data centers and any of the big three or big five hyperscalers. It's interesting to me that some of the challenges that they're saying are preventing them from this are also things that can be addressed by other aspects that were high priority for organizations. So we may just be right on the precipice of some change in organizations being able to address these directly. But I find it very interesting that there's correlation to what some of our biggest topic findings were in the survey versus the reasons others are not doing some of the other topics in the survey.
Good point. I mean, you know, just to kind of complete out the full thought of where the survey kind of honed in on, the number one AI use case that people focused on was security, cybersecurity related. So again, I think that rounds out, the full gist of, where people have a skills and a technology deficit. They're looking to AI, and security seems to be one of those places that they care a lot about, and they're looking to AI to kind of help them with that. But again, adopting that AI may have an issue because of the technology and the skills gap that they've got.
For
Yeah.
sure.
I think and it's a really good point, Jason, because I think in a lot of ways, and we've all used it ourselves to the extent where we can say, hey, we don't really know a lot about a particular topic area, which not the three of us, of course, but other people really look at it from that perspective. But I mean, in general, we use it to learn, and so it helps to close the gap, I think, in a lot of ways in terms of our knowledge. But as you mentioned earlier, there's number one is you have to understand how to use the technology, number one, but number two is you have to develop a level of trust. So how do you develop that level of trust with it? Because it's not just a matter of saying, oh, I know how to use it. It's also, am I comfortable with the result? And a lot of organizations today are talking about this. And I think this, I don't want to say stifles innovation, but it certainly puts a little bit of a damper on innovation because of the fact that it's like, while you may get what appears to be a really great result in terms of, say, the innovative concepts that are produced, you also have to come up with another mechanism for cross-validating, to use an AI term, that it makes sense and that you can trust the results. And I don't want to say hallucinate because that's way too general a term, but it's really just, how do I know that it's providing to me exactly what I'm looking for? And this gets back to this concept of how do you measure failure within an organization? It's always because of missed expectations. The tool doesn't do what I expected it to. Well, that's because you thought it could do something it couldn't really do. So of course, missed expectations. I think AI might get caught up in that same situation, I think, as we move forward.
Great point. I think some of my team, when we're implementing AI from a security perspective and AI returns a result, it doesn't necessarily return how it got the result. And that's one of those
Right.
things where I think those features are actually being embedded in now because people want to know, how did you get that? Because that doesn't really jive with what I thought was going to happen. And they need to have a level of confidence based on the sources. So they need to not just return the result, but return how they arrived at the result is an important aspect because then it'll create that trust.
And
Right.
Jason, linking in some of the overall results from a hybrid multi-cloud perspective with repatriation rates from cloud, going from a workload, it's very, very clear we've seen the trend emerge, 4 or 5 years ago when we saw workloads that were mass moved to cloud, maybe not designed, architected, and understood well before doing so. We would see these massive swings of an entire environment back to a traditional data center. It's too hard. We can't figure it out. It's too costly, et cetera. We've definitely seen that change over time as cloud has matured, as team skill sets have matured. And this year, the repatriation workloads, most organizations were saying, 20 to 40% of their workloads, I'm roughly making up numbers based on the average across the two silos, they're planning on moving back to on-prem. What we didn't ask in the survey, and I think we're seeing the indications of this based on the discussion y'all are having, is there are concerns about where is my data being used? Do I actually have clarity of prompt logging? Do I know why an answer was generated the way it was? Do I know what the question was that was asked? There's just a generic concern of security. And you couple that with the overall fear of security and overall concerns of our customer base in the cybersecurity space. I think we're seeing some knee-jerk reactions to pull back in some cases. And in others, it's just not well enough defined yet for them to truly be able to say, as these cloud adapters or cloud hyperscalers, adapt to a broader industry need to be able to prove how you came up with an answer, I think we'll see that emerge and the repatriation will slow again.
Mm.
Great point. Because I think that it could be as secure as anything else, but if we can't prove it, we gotta go somewhere we can actually prove it, and that typically means bring it back in house.
Right.
Or at
it is
least
interesting.
trend.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that's not my idea of the best thing to do. It's just the thing that people revert to when they want to do something the way that they know how to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely agree with that. And I think what, Tom's point's a good one. It's we are seeing not so much, well, maybe it is a little bit of movement back into the data center, but it's also an extension of the enterprise to the edge, which is the other pieces that we're seeing. So it's a lot easier then to think about how do I apply AI near the point of presence, because now I have some additional capabilities that I can use, whether it's in the call center or retail facility or hospitality, where we're looking at, maybe making the customer experience better for the end user or for the support person that might be dealing with, issues that somebody's calling in about. So putting the equipment there, it feels like it's a natural move. It's instead of centralizing into the cloud, it just feels like that's the thing that we would do. We want to make sure that we have the capabilities there. And of course, then, you probably cringe a little bit, Jason, as we talk about this, because now all of a sudden our surface area gets much larger. So we're starting to extend the surface area. So now we have to protect it. We have different protocols. We have different communications mechanisms. But I think the one thing maybe that, sort of this, the change in phenomenon can help us with a little bit more is, some of these felt like intractable problems for us. So now with AI enabled the ability to assess more information, to collect more information, to be able to draw inference from that information. It makes it a little bit more tractable in our world, so that we can say, where do I have alignment in my policies? Am I violating potential policies by using edge-based locations, or what information am I collecting, et cetera, et cetera? Everything that you do every day, Jason, is probably one of those areas where instead of hiring a fleet of SOC people, now maybe we can use some AI techniques to be able to maybe guarantee consistency, maybe look for vulnerabilities more effectively, so that because of the phenomenon, as Tom was talking about, of the multi-cloud, we now can be armed, so long as we figure out how to use AI, to be able to take this on, which is, I think, really kind of cool. So the transformation and innovation allows us to do more, I think, as we start to become more natural in terms of the application of computing.
Carm, you're hitting on a really interesting point too, because I totally agree. And when I say, traditional on-prem data center, we don't really have good vocabulary for the combination of a traditional rack and stack data center and edge. So physical infrastructure or virtual infrastructure that someone is managing. We saw that in the results for cybersecurity. So first time, I believe, ever that endpoint and IoT security and edge protection, I'm looking over at my little cheat sheet here, 43% of our customers for both of those were the top initiatives from a cybersecurity perspective. So I think it's probably safe to say you're pushing edge processing platforms, AI, ML, security operations, et cetera, into an edge environment in those scenarios, which is also driving up the complexity and the demand for updated policies, et cetera, in the security space.
Mm-hmm.
And from a confidence level, the maturity of those edge devices has gotten way better from a security perspective. So that means a lot, not just the devices themselves, but the way that we can manage those devices. And I think that I embrace the edge and leveraging AI at the edge, but you've got to have identities and data storage and those types of things sorted out. So I think, but I'm pretty confident with the way that the manufacturers have rallied, and some industries have kind of forced, healthcare and others have forced those manufacturers to kind of comply with the ability to update or those kinds of things. It's gotten a lot better than it was.
Yeah, fleet management was a pie in the sky concept 2 or 3 years ago that has now matured in a very aggressive manner, just about as fast as AI has matured, quite frankly, because that was usually an inhibitor.
Totally. It's did we talk about, we talked kind of about those things that held people up, skill sets and optimization of the infrastructure, from the as a service model, especially like DaaS, device as a service, that seems to be a way that you can leverage that because it increases a lot of efficiency in your organization, potentially even a cost savings, and frees up your people to maybe skill up or to devote time to things that are more important to the organization.
Yeah, it's interesting in that context, because I mean, I even think about, devices as a service is a great example, but maybe the use of the term commoditization is maybe too strong, but in general, when we start to think about the fact that it's like we have consensus as it relates to, like, what should a device be capable of doing, how do we want to represent a device, what are the standards by which we want to manage, maintain, secure, control devices, then we can start to think about, well, okay, if we want to apply best practices principles, then as a service gives us a really nice model, because we don't have variability and uniqueness across the entire domain. And you can almost apply that to anything, right, to an extent. I mean, I think eventually we'll think about AI as a service at some point. I mean, we're not quite there yet, but there are actually AI algorithms that basically they're boosting algorithms. They find the best algorithm for your use case. It's like, okay, well, it's based on a set of principles and it's providing a service to you and it's testing the best most efficient algorithms, we might get there as well. But I think it really gets to this innovation cycle. And the one thing that we keyed in on in the survey was we wanted to understand, like, what are organizations, like, how do they handle innovation and transformation? And then also, what does it mean in terms of importance to the organization? And the reason why I think it stays so important in the context of why it's of concern to an organization is because we have a constantly evolving cycle of, moving things that are sort of, I'll call it fast follower, bleeding edge, into the enterprise, but other things are moving into the more commoditization mode. So it's always top of mind. Losing my voice. I get choked up talking about this topic. But it basically, it's, so I think we see this cycle, which is interesting. So I think we'll see the same maybe general phenomenon happening, but what causes the skills gap, what causes the the failure to innovate as quickly as possible, are the result of the fact that it's a constantly changing technological landscape, which is really super cool for us, and I think very challenging for organizations.
And I look at where, the industry 6-7 years ago was really stuck from a budget perspective between OpEx and CapEx. So, you had most of our customers 7 years ago were largely on a, 3 to 5 year refresh cycle. That equipment was all bought at different times. Support was renewed at different times. Licensing was updated at different times. And it became this massive, matrix algebra equation to try to figure out, how did we roll this budget off while also investing in a CapEx spend in the cloud, or OpEx spend in the cloud, sorry, versus, not having the double pay for 3 to 5 years. And for most of our customers, that was very, very difficult. So as we've seen as a service shifts and capabilities in the infrastructure space the last 3 to 4 years, and really the last 1 to 2 years, their ability to more agilely move infrastructure around, repatriate, move back out, move back in, depending on demands, on costs of network connectivity, on cost of application running, development versus production applications running, absolutely the case in an AI world too. That emphasis and growth to me is very indicative of the fact that customers are willing to at least equally pay, if not have a slight cost reduction based on consumed quantity, and add the value for those teams to focus on, we're consuming this as a true service. I don't need to worry about the bits and bytes of my storage platform anymore, for example. And in some cases, the movement of that data in between cloud providers and a traditional data center or edge environment is actually way cheaper than them just continuing to build capacity in a continuous state. So that to me is an indicator also driving what we're seeing from the importance of customers to get there. And as cloud has become more popular, organizations have gotten into a space where OpEx spend is a lot more acceptable.
Yeah, I think a really important point that you're making there, Tom, is it's not one that you necessarily said, but you inferred it. It's economies of scale. So the when you get into this environment of an as a service, and you providers that are for example, infrastructure as a service from cloud providers, public cloud providers, not only can they provide these services to you and make it more efficient and give you PaaS style services that allow you to be able to do things like security more effectively, or just general security or WAF protection, whatever you're looking for. But they also have the ability to then capitalize the equipment in a much more effective way, or even purchase it in a much more effective way.
Yep.
And I think that's true of any as a service model, because as a service companies like Insight, for example, we do so much work in the space that we can provide these services at lower price point because we do so much work in the space. So it's not even an apples to apples comparison. Like for an enterprise, and they say, oh, let's use an as a service model. It's not just the fact that we're maybe using automation and programmatizing, the interfaces. It's more of when you go to a provider that has an as a service offering, you leverage the economies of scale, which I think is really helpful, because then you can observe what are the patterns and behaviors, how do you provide additional features and functionality that can make your job easier and protect against, for example, vulnerabilities, other kinds of things. So I think it's a really interesting point. And I think that phenomenon is probably one that, again, is part of that cycle, right? Where we get into innovation, maturity, and then moving into this commoditization and as a service models, where we can then start to think about providing, sort of mass economies of scale.
I thought there was another interesting finding too in regards to platform engineering that I think is relevant to this. And to me, this is actually driving the capabilities of organizations to do this across traditional infrastructure, cloud environments, edge platforms. We used to see a very common practice where you'd have a cloud team and you'd have an infrastructure team, and that was it. And 86% of organizations this year said they are currently implementing or have implemented a platform engineering team, which to me is the continuity between those two orgs, if you will, in most organizations that is required to do this. And really interesting to me is automating cloud provisioning, creating self-service portals, et cetera. That dropped down as a priority. The number one priority for platform engineering creation at 64% of all customers was embedding security controls, policies, compliance frameworks to protect cloud data, which once again links back that need. And these are all kind of interlinked in driving outcomes that I find pretty fascinating at the rate we're seeing.
To loop back to an earlier stat, I don't know if we said the stat or not, but 98% of the respondents reported current or planned use of multi-cloud. And the number one and two things that they were concerned about, number one was security and number two was complexity of those environments, which loops right back to your platform engineering discussion.
Yep.
So again, we've got this brilliant technology, and to leverage organizationally from a capability perspective, but man, there's a gap that a lot of folks have. And some of that can be alleviated by, as a service model, some of that can be alleviated by managed services and those kinds of things. It's a people, process, and technology problem. And I think that's probably why it comes into, it's difficult for organizations to kind of sort that out, because people like to buy the technology, but the whole people and process aspect is one of those things, again, which is why from a solution perspective, we've got to bake all of that in, because it's more than just the tech.
Once again, humans keep messing up all the technology.
or don't think about them. I just wanted to reemphasize that multi-cloud point just a little bit. When I look at the rationale, and we didn't ask this question specifically, but the rationale is embedded in it. But two of the reasons the rationale was, one is spreading workloads across multiple providers, which is relatively high statistic, and then using providers in different regions to meet local requirements. So basically, this really is kind of, the first one really indicates to me sort of the ability to use multi-regional support or business continuity. So it sort of fits into that, I need to spread my workload so that I'm not susceptible in one, or my eggs aren't in one basket model. And the second one is maybe it's a little bit more on the side of, not only do we have to deal with privacy issues and domiciled of data, or domiciling of data, I think we're going to see the same thing in responsible AI. So I think organizations may be starting to prepare for that to happen as well. So we're seeing all the responsible AI regulations starting to come out. So that is kind of interesting. And then the last one was specific providers have different application domains or services that they can provide, which is, okay, that's kind of normal, right? So it's like, oh, I can get whatever, I really like Vertex AI or something in Google, so I'm going to use Google. And that's usually the way that you would select a multi-cloud platform or a particular platform for your use case. So it is super interesting to see sort of the way that people are thinking about this. It's security, regulation, it's business continuity. It's not just low cost provider. So it is pretty interesting in terms of the way they think about multi-cloud.
Jason, I have one question for you on the on the cybersecurity one, because there was a finding on decision makers likely to agree with the statement, and it was interesting to me that there was the top answer at 93% this year was, I am fully confident in my organization's business continuity plan, but we also see the results of the concerns for ransomware attack. And we tend to see this, I think it's a concern of saying, I'm openly aware that we have some shortcomings versus is it reality? I'm curious as to your take on that, particularly with, I'm only aware of one customer out of all the customers that you and I have spoken to over the last couple of years here that actually said we had a plan that truly mitigated this and reduced the actual attack surface. We lost a couple devices or a couple machines and it stopped there. And that doesn't seem to jive with that statistic.
We also break the survey down for those of you who check it out. the people who are VP and above and the people who are director and below. And I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a disconnect between the people at the higher levels of their confidence in certain things because maybe they're believing what people tell them. And that usually is the rude awakening. Another stat that's interesting from the survey is what was the percentage? 43% of people said that they were impacted by one or more security breaches in the last 12 months. And that's a huge amount. So with that, and to your earlier point, I think that people with really sound business continuity and disaster recovery plans that they're able to execute on is a really, really low percentage in reality. They may have the plans, but their ability to execute on the plans is way less than they expect. And I think that's a devastating thing to find out at the last moment or in the fray of it, as you and I are both aware. It's but it's one of those things where I think that there's leaders, the SEC has recently required that members of the board be more involved from a cybersecurity perspective. And that is one of those elements that the board's got to be more informed. They've got to be more educated on those kinds of things to be able to have the appropriate information for shareholders and that type of thing. And I do think that there's an overestimation from that statistic. And that's nothing but love to all the folks who filled out the survey. But it's one of those things that I think people feel more confident. It's just like hurricane. I live in Florida, right? Hurricanes come all the time for people in Florida, but yet you still see people who are kind of left holding the bag when they've been told and they've had to prepare because they never really were affected. But when they happen to be, it's we never thought it would be this way.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
I was going to just point out another statistic that I thought was really interesting as we go through some of this, and it's of course in the AI space, but so we're talking about using combinations of AI to be able to deliver outcomes to the business. But one stat within that category, which was 64% of respondents said that real-time information access was important, which to me, like real-time information and decision making was really something that we didn't embrace too frequently. Like if you're reporting on maybe stock tickers or something like that, and that the information is of high quality, then you could actually start to move in that pathway. You could say, yeah, let's do some real-time analytics. But to see that so many organizations now are responding that real-time analytics is becoming important to them, is sort of closing that gap between collecting information and then being able to perform the analysis. And it's really sort of moving us more toward trusted decision-making processes that are embedded into the process overall. So I think some of the challenges that we have been talking about as it relates to AI will start to come to the forefront because we have to act quickly. And in that same category, threat analysis was 77% in terms of AI capabilities. So the combination of those, they kind of go together, right? Because if you're talking about threat analysis, it probably needs to be real time. Because if you wait, till midnight tonight to collect all your data and then do some analysis for 4 hours, and then you're like, hey, we had a threat, right? So yeah, so I think the combination of a lot of what we're seeing, it's this really nice confluence of, the GPUs are getting faster, the storage is getting better, the access to information is getting more robust. So now we can start to bring this all together to create these kinds of really interesting solutions. And so it's really coming out as part of what we're seeing coming from customers in the survey as it relates to real-time decision making. So I think that's really cool. And it's a bit of a change for us because AI used to be, give the data to the data scientists. Maybe they need to collect some more data, and then
a year.
Right, exactly. I created a model. Oh, the error rate was too high. I've got to go back and retrain it. So we're moving. I'm not saying we're moving away from that because that's still very, very valid in this world, but we're starting to move more toward how can I do more real-time decision making, and it will drive innovation within the space. And I think it's really cool that we're seeing this happening.
Great. I think that's why security is probably such a good use case for that real-time side, is because security telemetry is typically aggregated already. If you're trying to get real-time data for the rest of the organization and pull it from multiple parts, there typically isn't an easy way to do that. It hasn't already been sorted out. That data estate in most organizations hasn't been kind of prepped for that yet, where I think security was closer, maybe not perfect for sure.
We see it collected a lot, but rarely actually used.
Right.
Exactly.
insert the value. And I mean, the speed of that decision making, there's some downsides to the speed of, ML or AI based decision making too. But I mean, Jason, we've seen situations, 40,000 workloads gone in under an hour and a half. I mean, completely encrypted and gone. So the requirement for very, very high speed reaction to that, to isolate and immediately cut off, is critically important. And that's going to get worse because the bad guys are also using it in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So probably a good place to wrap, maybe not on such a bad note. Let's talk about something positive on the end. So I think, one of the things that we kind of figured out, along the way of analyzing all this stuff is that the technology is coming, it's being adopted. There are solutions to help people optimize and move forward. Those things are becoming more mature. Edge is more mature. There's a lot of things there's a lot of, it would be terrible to just say, hey, you guys who have a skills gap or an infrastructure gap or those things, good luck. But I still, I love the fact that there's a way to figure this out, but it isn't simply a technology path. Is that fair to say, guys?
Mm.
Super fair. And to me, it's exciting right now because usually we have a couple core themes that come out of our findings every year, and they're a little bit more disconnected than these themes are. And what's exciting to me is that you can actually analyze the data in this report, and you can actually find that they are all linked. And oftentimes the other concern point is actually the fix to that, or vice versa. And it's the first time we've had the ability to really process data at the speed we can now to get to that real-time decision making Carm's talking about. And we're seeing just such a fast pace of change. So as long as you're okay with a little bit of chaotic change, there's some good data in there for you to analyze and use as you're planning in your organization's move forward.
Great.
I guess on a positive note, maybe I'll go back to some of what we were talking about as it related to sort of the organizational preparedness. And when we think about the usage of these capabilities, I think there's a little bit of a double-edged sword there. On the one hand, it's sort of the promise of AI can solve all the world's problems, or all the enterprise's problems, which is not necessarily true. So I think making sure that as an organization you really understand what are the viable capabilities today for AI and how can it be put to good use. And I think in a lot of ways we talk to customers all the time, and we end up having to have that conversation because sometimes people want to start talking about AGI, and they're like, when is Terminator going to come and take over everything so I don't have to worry about this anymore. But but in all seriousness, there is sort of that speculation of what AI can do, and then there's the reality of where are we today. And so I think it's good to have a grounding in what is possible today. And over the course of the last year, we saw this, and it's reflected a little bit in our in the survey as well. But it was more, we've moved from the thinking about the art of the possible to the execution of the possible, and that's sort of where we are today. So how do we execute based off of this? And to your point, Jason, it is about it's about understanding what we can expect from the technology, but it's also about making sure that the organization can adapt to and learn how to use it. And I think that's really important to make it work, I guess, for the enterprise, as opposed to, replace the personas in the enterprise. And so I think that's just a common phenomenon culturally that organizations are going to have to sort of get on the bandwagon. And, we've been through it. We certainly will help customers understand how to do it. And I think that will just have, continue to happen as so long as we evolve in this innovation cycle.
Great. Well, thanks, gentlemen. That was fun. And I think, to Tom's point, all these things kind of converged. Our conversation didn't just kind of focus in one area. It kind of worked its way around a couple of times around the bend because all of these things are so interrelated. If you want to know more about what we do, please visit us at Insight.com and check out our survey. There's lots of good tidbits in there, and we'd love to talk to you about any of those. If you have any comments about future episodes and topics, please feel free to send those our way. And thank you for joining us today. Cheers, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.